A word of caution. This episode features depictions of murder and death that may be disturbing to some listeners. In 1933, two different crimes in South Carolina grabbed the headlines. One involved a widow who was murdered in her affluent neighborhood late in the evening while out walking. The other involved a botched kidnap and ransom of a teenage boy whose father was a prominent member of the community. One crime was solved, and the other remains a mystery. The news archives from 1933 also painted a vivid picture of what life was like in the South during that time period. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years, from murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters. Some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 119, The 1933 South Carolina Murders of Mary Ravenel and Hubbard Harris, Jr. On November 1st, 1933, around 10 p.m., the city of Charleston, South Carolina was stunned when two passers-by discovered a 64-year-old woman named Mary Ravenel gravely injured on Meeting Street, just north of Water Street near her home. Mary was on her way home from eating dinner at the Fort Sumter Hotel with friends. Thinking the woman had been the victim of a hit-and-run accident, the two young women who discovered her hailed a man driving by so they could put her into their car and get her to a nearby hospital quickly. During the drive, Mary cried out in pain, asking to be let out of the car and saying adamantly that she knew she was going to die. Once at the hospital, Mary told Dr. J. Avery Finger that a man had hit her. The doctor asked if it was by a car, and she said, "No, I don't know what it was." Medical staff tried in vain to discover where the source of her pain was coming from, to no avail. She passed away a short time later. When the coroner took a closer look at Mary after her death, he discovered a small gunshot wound underneath her right arm. She had been shot, and the bullet had entered her body and gotten lodged in her chest. There had been no powder burns on her clothing or body. The official cause of death was internal bleeding, and it was ruled as a homicide. It appeared from the trajectory of the bullet as if Mary had tried to raise her arm to block the gunshot. Born Mary Mack, Mary Ravenel was originally from Detroit, Michigan. She had moved to the South when she married a man named William E. Martin in 1892. His family had owned a plantation in Shirley, South Carolina. Mary and William had 4 children before his death in 1905. 2 years later, while living in Savannah, Georgia, Mary met and married a man named John Ravenel. John was the son of a physician in Charleston who worked in the phosphate industry. Mary soon established herself in many different prominent social circles in Charleston. With her husband, an active and successful golfer, she joined the Country Club of Charleston, the American Legion Auxiliary, and was an active member of her church. She hosted teas and dances in the community. On the afternoon before she was murdered, Mary, now a widow, had attended a funeral, and a group of friends had made sure she got home safely. Right before the shooting, a resident of the neighborhood, Mrs. Harry Sammons, said she heard a pistol shot, a woman's scream, and the sound of an automobile driving away from the scene where Mary was wounded. In the days following Mary's death, police looked into a number of theories of how she might have been shot. They said they heard there had been a cat fight in the neighborhood, and a resident had intended to break it up by shooting off a pistol, and instead injured Mary by mistake. Had Mary been out walking home from dinner that evening and seen a man firing a pistol? After all, she told the first women on the scene that a man had hit her. Another theory was that Mary had been the victim of a botched robbery. She was murdered in one of Charleston's most wealthy neighborhoods, near the Battery, but crime occasionally trickled in from the surrounding areas. This crime also took place during the Great Depression, when many South Carolinians were down on their luck. If it was an attempted robbery that ended in a shooting, the robber failed to take Mary's pocketbook or any jewelry she had on her person at the time. Mary Ravenel was what you could consider a low-risk victim, a widow in her 60s, a pillar of the community, a woman who seemed to get along with everyone she met. About a month after Mary Ravenel died, Mayor Burnett R. Maybank announced he would pay $250 for information leading to the apprehension and conviction of the person or persons responsible for her death. Mary's murder went cold until the spring of 1938. That was when a Blackstone, Virginia resident named William Allen was found dead by suicide, and he had left behind a note claiming he had murdered 5 people. He alleged 2 of his victims were from Charleston. This detail got back to investigators in Charleston, and 2 detectives traveled to Virginia to learn more about William Allen. Allen had married a woman from the Charleston area when she traveled to Virginia in 1926 looking for work. They had 2 children before separating just a few years later, and he was charged for what one newspaper called poor treatment of his family. His wife returned to Charleston and remarried. Virginia police had a warrant out for Allen's arrest for the murder of a 28-year-old named Jeanette Worsham when he took his life. The note he left behind read in part, "The knife and swift weight I used to kill 2 in Charleston, South Carolina, 1 in Hopewell, Virginia, 1 in Petersburg, Virginia. No job, no money, no health. I'm going to take Jeanette with me." The investigators questioned Allen's former wife in Charleston. She told them she had not seen him since their divorce, but that he did usually carry a knife strapped to his leg. This was the type of knife used in Jeanette Worsham's murder and the murder of his other unnamed victims in Virginia. Police believed he had mentioned having victims in Charleston because he wanted news of his death to get back to his ex-wife. They concluded he had probably never even been to Charleston and was not involved in Mary Ravenel's shooting. The murder of Mary Ravenel was never solved. On December 23, 1933, a 15-year-old young man named Hubbard H. Harris, Jr. went missing from the Columbia, South Carolina area on his birthday. The boy was the son of Hubbard Harris, Sr., vice president of Home Stores, Inc., a grocery store chain at the time. 48 hours after he went missing, 3 residents of the Olympia Mill Village discovered a body in a deserted home about 11 miles outside of Columbia, underneath a dilapidated mattress. The boy had been beaten to death, and the murder weapon, a blood-spattered iron bar, was found nearby. Hubbard Jr.'s mother told officers a man had called their home several times to offer her son an employment opportunity. The last time he was seen, he was getting into a light model car with a man wearing glasses that Saturday morning. His mother assumed the man was the same one who had been telling her son about a possible job. Police quickly tracked down a suspect, a 49-year-old unemployed auto mechanic named Robert Wiles. He admitted he'd picked up Hubbard Jr. on Saturday morning in a borrowed car, but denied murdering him. He said he had let the boy out of the car in an area of town called the Bluff Road. It didn't take long for more information about the murder to come to light. Police told the media at first they believed Wiles was hired by a third party to kidnap Hubbard Jr., possibly for ransom, but things got out of control once Hubbard Jr. realized something nefarious was going on. Wiles said a man named John Rushton, a meat cutter employed at one of the home stores, devised the plan. Rushton denied any involvement, but was jailed anyway. Wiles told police the young man was suspicious when they had arrived at the deserted home in Columbia. Wiles told him that boys used to go to that area to meet girls, which Hubbard Jr. responded with, "This is a devil of a place. Let's go." When Wiles told the young man he could get used to it, he said Hubbard Jr. struck him in the face. That's when Wiles picked up the iron bar that was lying nearby and beat him several times about the face and the head. Then he dragged the boy's body from the backyard up into the house. He said he had devised the plan to kidnap the boy for ransom, hoping to collect at least $1,000 from Hubbard Jr.'s family. Wiles then drove back into town, encountered Hubbard Sr. on the street, and wished him a Merry Christmas. Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. The last thing I want to do this spooky season is look in the mirror and be frightened by the reflection of a tired woman with bags under her eyes. The products from SkinxErin give me the confidence to go throughout my day with clear and healthy-looking skin. I'm a no-frills kind of gal, and that's what I like about their skincare system. Using the Pre-Cleanse Oil, Hydrating Beauty Oil, and Perfecting Night Oil are a real treat for my skin, and my morning and night routines take less than 5 minutes. I love that these products don't leave my skin feeling greasy and are loaded with squalene oil and vitamins E and A. Plus, they are extremely affordable. Their customer service can't be beat. Go ahead and show your own skin some love with 10% off your order using my code MissingCarolinas10. I'll include a link in the show notes for you. Are you looking to level up your writing or learn a new skill? Whether you focus on nonfiction or more inclined to creative writing or want to learn how to put together a digital portfolio of your writing, Wow Women on Writing can help. Interested in podcasting? Check out a digital course I created called You Can Start a Podcast. During this pre-recorded webinar, you will learn the benefits of creating your own podcast, materials you need to get started, how to develop content that will keep listeners coming back for more, and ways your podcast can create supplemental income. I'll share examples of different types of podcasts, how to decide on a format, ways to handle the technology necessary for creating a podcast, how to develop your first few episodes, promotion and monetization ideas, and ways you can repurpose your podcast content. All written materials and resources are provided by me. I'll also give you a handout with information discussed in the webinar, along with suggestions for a few different types of podcasts to explore. Best of all, this webinar only costs $30. You can find it by going to wow-womenonwriting.com and clicking on the Classroom tab. I'll put a link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. A large number of stores in Columbia closed on the day Hubbard H. Harris Jr. was buried. The president of the student body of his junior high school requested all classmates attend the services for the young man. He was described by his peers and teachers as a good student who was interested in a variety of sports. He'd wanted to explore football and track once he entered high school. He enjoyed spending time with his parents and sister, which included attending weekly church services, where he was the president of his Sunday school class. Less than a month after Hubbard Jr. was murdered, Robert Wiles, who had pleaded insanity in the case, went on trial for the crime in Columbia. In the closing arguments, the prosecutor, C.T. Graydon, said the case was a difficult one because the crime was unusual for the state of South Carolina. It was the first case where an innocent child had been lured into an automobile to be made way with, the first time the serpentine head of the kidnapper had shown itself in the state, he said. As to the plea of insanity, Graydon responded he had never seen a man display a better memory than Wiles. He said Wiles had gone on the witness stand and recalled exact dates of events that occurred years earlier. He said the defendant himself had said on the stand that he knew what he did was wrong. The defendant's wife, 2 daughters, and son waited outside the courtroom. It took a jury 22 minutes to find him guilty. He was sentenced to death by the electric chair. The judge said he had been on the bench for 22 years, and he had never dreamed he would be sentencing a man to death. After hearing the verdict and sentence, Wiles showed no emotion. His attorneys requested a commitment to the state hospital for a sanity examination. The judge ruled that the execution date would allow time for Wiles to be evaluated, but said he could not order a commitment to the state hospital in light of the testimony presented at the trial. An interesting fact I read in some of the newspapers was that Wiles had also murdered his first wife and her alleged lover several years prior. I was not able to find out if he had ever served time for those crimes or if those details were shared at the trial. Wiles was not spared. On March 12, 1934, as he was being led to his execution, he said, "I am guilty. I did it, and I am ready to pay for it. There was no one else in it. All the rest are free and clear." As he was strapped to the table, he began praising God in song before the high current of voltage caused his death. One thing I noticed when looking at all these archived newspaper articles from 1933 was the number of crime stories featured. Many of these papers ran mostly crime articles from The Wire all along the front page. I wanted to share a few of them that I thought you might enjoy hearing about. In early November of 1933, the South Carolina newspapers were reporting that a 50-year-old farmer named Tom Maccabee and his girlfriend, 28-year-old Lizzie Taylor, had been arrested in the death of a 2-year-old boy named Clyde Gillespie in Anderson, South Carolina. The boy had been living at the home of Lizzie Taylor, along with his mother, Maybelle Gillespie, age 35, and another 7-year-old son she had. Maccabee and Taylor allegedly drove the family from the home with a threat of violence with a pistol and a butcher knife, and forced them to sleep in the woods. Maybelle Gillespie was the widowed stepmother of Lizzie Taylor. She told police the couple didn't want to feed the baby any longer. They stayed there from Sunday evening through a Wednesday evening in the woods when Clyde's mother found him deceased. A coroner ruled the child had died from starvation and exposure. Local witnesses reported they had heard screams coming from the woods where the mother and her children were exposed to the cold elements. They had lived in the woods for 3 days with no food and only one sheet to cover them. The day after she was arrested, Lizzie Taylor was released from the county jail on a $1,500 bond. While this story dominated the news cycle for several weeks, I could not find any other articles about what the outcome was. I would love to know if the couple was held responsible for the neglect that caused little Clyde Gillespie's death and what caused this family feud, but it appears it will remain a mystery. One news brief on the front page of the Asheville Times, where I was researching Mary Ravenel's death, carried the headline, "Farmer Loses Finger After Wagon Mishap." It detailed how one Henry Dodson from the Forest City area got his hand caught in the brake of a wagon, causing the amputation of one of his fingers at the first joint. Apparently, he was hauling corn when the accident occurred. The November 2nd, 1933 edition of The State reported that Charles Hilton, a former policeman for the city of Charleston, was stabbed to death with an ice pick on Market Street when he tried to intervene in a drinking brawl. The suspect was a man named Earl T. Riggs, who had been arrested multiple times. According to witnesses, Riggs had approached Hilton, opened his arms, and said, "Let's be friends, Charlie." He stabbed Hilton in the head during the embrace. Another news brief in that same issue told of an argument that happened in an establishment called Bagnall's Lunchroom, located in the Five Points area of Columbia. The proprietor had been arguing with another employee, and a knife fight ensued. The proprietor, C. Briggs Walker, was taken to the hospital with several deep cuts, but none were life-threatening. The society columns in these archives were also a good read. One issue from Asheville reported Halloween festivities in the Realm of Women and Society column. Here's an example of what was in the column. Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher Roberts gave a delightful Halloween party Tuesday evening for their children, Fletcher and Jane Roberts. Their home in Laurel Park was decorated to suggest the spooky holiday, and favors marked the places for the children at the attractively appointed table. In the contests, prizes were won by Betty Andrews and Archibald Corrier, Jr. And curiously, one paragraph from the December 26, 1933 edition of the Ledger-Inquirer reported, "Little girl dies from excitement." It stated that a girl from Scarsboro, New York, had died on December 25th. Dorothy Jane Long, aged 8, wanted to remain awake all night so that she could finally speak to Santa Claus. Finally, she fell asleep after asking her mother to awaken her should Santa come. That morning, Dorothy was found dead by Mrs. Long. Doctors said she had died of excitement. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com. Renee Robertson. I currently don't receive any compensation for this podcast, so every little bit helps me continue producing new content. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Wow Women on Writing, and the great programs and writing contests they have there at wow-womenonwriting.com. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.